Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. As we're going into Thanksgiving, I pray that you have a safe, and wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Indeed, this tends to be the most heavily traveled holiday in our calendar. Everyone, please be careful. They say it's easier, or should I safer, if you travel before 10 a.m. or between 1 and 7 p.m. Just be careful and really work on having a good time, everybody. I know it's been a contentious moment for us politically and socially, and in so many ways, been fraught with a lot of tensions. We're living with that. And I've heard some people even say, maybe you shouldn't be with your relatives for the holiday or your loved ones because of political disagreements. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Go be with the people that you love. If you think about who was at your left or your right, in front of you or behind you, some people who were there with you last year are not there with you this year. Think about that. Some people who are with you this year might not be with you next year. Think about that. Everybody, let's just have a wonderful holiday and holy season. That's what we're going into. And let's come together and have a great time on Thursday. Hey, Robert, shalom to you and Andre and sending you all so much love, everybody. Please, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. I know we're coming up just a little late today, but we're still here. And so please, we're going to be talking about Project 2025 in the second hour. What is it? Why are so many civil rights and civil liberties groups saying this is very dangerous? And why is it particularly dangerous to the most vulnerable? Why? Let's talk about that. But then we will be talking in this first segment, in this first hour, about Jussie Smollett. Of course, the famed actor. Of course, we know him best for his role, his pivotal and groundbreaking role on Empire. And his musical and acting career was on the ascendant when he was involved in this attack. Hey, Catherine, how you doing? And many people have a lot of questions about this, of course, and the trial itself. There were a lot of questions about the conduct of the judge. The judge became physically confrontational with a member of his defense team. There were no cameras allowed in the courtroom. There were just so many questions, and we just have a lot of questions. But guess what? His conviction was overturned, which took a lot of people by surprise. We thought this story was behind us, but actually it's not. It's still with us. It has been something that Jussie and his very large, very tightly knit family have been living with. In the meantime, he's finished a movie that he is about to debut before the public. That having been said, we want to know what your thoughts are. What your thoughts are. We're going to speak as we listen to this woman. She's got 10 minutes with us today. Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson from Rainbow Push, advisor to Reverend Jackson, head of the Push for Excellence program, and the chair of our board, attorney C.K. Hoffler. They're joining us, and they'll be responding after we hear from Ms. Chelly Stanley. I was drawn to her tremendous investigative work that I was reading as this case was ongoing. She brought up facts that I'd never heard. I'd never heard about the troubled backgrounds of the police. I didn't know as much about Jussie Smollett as I came to know. Knew of his family because his family has been very active in civil rights on the West Coast for years. So knew him that way. But of course, he had continued on with that. And so she really put a lot of information out there and connected it to a troubled and troublesome relationship that we have had with the police. She really gave us greater context. And now she is a law student, and we're so happy to have her with us today. And as we welcome attorney C.K. Hoffler to the stage, I want to welcome you, Chelly Stanley, back to the show. I've had you here some time ago, but I'm so glad that you're here with us. And so until we get everybody right where we need them to be, I'm going to remove everyone from the stage until we get everyone queued up. But Chelly Stanley, how are you? Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Yes, good morning, Santita. Thanks so much for having me on again. I appreciate it. And yes, like you said, you are the first one who noticed this work and was interested in it. So I forever appreciate you for that. it's just been quite a journey, to find all this information and to share it with the public. But I'm glad to do it again today. And, I know that people, when they hear it, are very alarmed. So it's definitely important information, context.
Well, you know what? Let us start here because I want to encapsulate because you doggedly pursued this story for quite some time. Uh, in about 10 minutes or so, if you can tell us what you found that many of us did not know.
Yes. So basically, and to sum it all up very quickly, the Chicago Police Department lied to the public about this case from the beginning. They were telling us in the public that they could find no suspects matching the description that Jesse gave. And that was a complete lie. The way that I learned about this being a lie was that I actually read the police reports. And I found that in the police reports, they had actually found two witnesses who corroborated Jesse's story. They found videos of men at the scene and running from the scene. And so that's how I started to really investigate these lies that the police had told the public. With the two witnesses, both of the witnesses told the police immediately after the attack that the men they saw at the scene were white. One witness saw a man standing outside the building with a rope hanging out of his pocket before the attack, and she was very uncomfortable and went inside to get away from him. After the attack, the men ran from the scene and they ended up running by a guard at the Sheraton Hotel, who is a Black man. He was working in the middle of the night. They ran by him. He shined his flashlight in the face of the first man, and he saw that the man was 6 feet tall, masked, and white. And he told this to police after they came to interview him because they had seen him on film, on the video. The police ignored him, continued to try to make him change his story, brought him into a lineup of all Black men, even though he had told the police that the guy he saw was white, and said, just pick someone out of this lineup. And of course, he refused to do that because the guy that he saw was white at the scene. That same witness, Anthony Moore, he testified at trial and said that Dan Webb's prosecutorial team pressured and threatened him for hours to make him change his story and say that the guy was Black that ran by him. He refused to do that, and he came to court and said that that's what had happened to him, and pointed out Sean Weber as being the person who was threatening him during that conversation that he had with the special prosecutor's office. So, all of this was happening, but far from public eye. Even though he spoke out during the trial, it wasn't covered in the media. So there's just been so many things like that are just hidden from the public. And so the public is being told this very specific story about three ridiculous Black men. Like, that's the story that was fed to the public by CPD, rather than this being a story of a hate crime attack that was done, by a white man against Jesse. It got changed into a story about three crazy Black men who were just in this ridiculous story together. And of course, the way that the police did that was that they arrested two Black men and threatened them with charges, despite being told by all witnesses that the men that ran from the scene were white.
We're talking with Kelly Stanley. She was the investigative reporter who really brought up these unknown facts. They were known, but they were not reported. These unreported facts about the Jussie Smollett case, which was just overturned by the Illinois State Supreme Court. I want you to hear from her. We have about 5 more minutes with you, and just talk to me about the police because they're the ones who framed this story, of course, with the help of the corporate media. What about you said that there were the backgrounds of the police were troublesome. Could you expound
Yeah.
upon that?
Yes, definitely. So, I basically added up their allegations, and there were 38 detectives and supervisors on this case, and they had a combined 563 misconduct allegations formally filed against them by the public in Chicago. They've also been sued for misconduct 16 times, which those 16 times have been paid out by taxpayers. So those lawsuits were for things like shooting innocent people and then trying to frame them, uh, taking an innocent person and trying to get him to confess to a crime he didn't commit, and then slamming his head against the wall repeatedly when he refused to incriminate himself falsely. They were for, you know, attacking a mother and son in Chicago, and saying all these kind of racist things to them. One person kicked a man who was lying in a fetal position for several minutes, causing him severe spinal injuries. These are the things they were sued for, and that the city paid out for these detectives. Also, we have Richard Hagan, who was sued in the Laquan McDonald case, and he's actually the detective. He's a kind of a tech guy for Chicago. So he was the detective who was sitting at the Burger King surveillance console when the video suddenly became erased from the video. And that's very famous in Chicago, that suddenly 60 Minutes got erased from the Burger King. And that was Richard Hagan sitting there. So he was on this case. He was one of the ones who was, quote, finding videos and not finding videos. So these are the detectives on this case. And, that was not reported to the public. But when you see this kind of group of detectives, they're coming out of 51st and Wentworth station, which, people in Chicago know that is a notorious station. The brothers that were arrested later were brought to that station and were basically held there for 48 hours under pressure to confess to something which they clearly did not do because nobody at the scene remotely identified them. And in the 47th hour, they confessed. Basically they said that they were the ones who did this attack, even though the previous 47 hours they were saying they had nothing to do with it.
Well, what happened in the 48th hour?
Yeah, it's very interesting because Anthony Guglielmi actually spoke about this on a CNN documentary that's no longer online, but he said that they told the brothers that Jesse had ID'd them. And he said, so we told them, which was not true. Jesse did not ID them. He said, so we told them we're going to move forward with hate crime charges. You've just been ID'd. And so basically, he's lying to them and threatening them with hate crime charges. And he said, and that's when they decided to broker a deal. So this has never been talked about in the public. And he was the first of CPD and the only one in CPD, chief spokesman Anthony Guglielmi, to admit that the brothers actually brokered a deal under threat and being lied to. So yeah, basically, as people know in Chicago, it's known as the false confession capital of the country. CPD have a scandal history of torturing people into falsely confessing against themselves. And the brothers were in a notorious precinct, which was very well known for that, held for 47 hours. And then in the final hour before they would either be charged themselves or released and were threatened with charges, they suddenly said that they were the ones who concocted this hate crime.
Well, Shelley Stanley, we are at the 10-minute mark, and it will become clear as time goes on why we've had 10 minutes to speak with you today. But we are so glad that you are with us today, that you've been with us. I'm so glad that you were with us before. It was just a blessing to be able to bump into the magnificent work that you've done, the investigative work that you've done. I think not those of us in Chicago and those of us around the country, indeed around the world, we support good policing, but we always try to expose corruption whenever we see it. And we've seen so much of it in Chicago. And, just power people are abusive of it. And so we want to thank you for your work. We cannot wait to have you back on the show. And we're going to have Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, Esquire from Rainbow Push, and the chair of our board, the past national president of the National Bar Association, the largest and oldest Black bar association in the world with us. And of course, you can see her on Court TV throughout the week. Of course, you won't tell me today when we can see her on Court TV, but you can catch her as a legal analyst there throughout the week, every week. And she's on her own show on AOK, the iconic Black Talk radio station in Atlanta, attorney C.K. Hoffler. Sending you so much love, Shelley Stanley. Hit those
Yes,
books,
thank you
girl.
all. I'm going to keep tuning in offline. Thank you.
Okay. We're gonna, we're gonna let you. I'm gonna take you off stage, and then you can listen to the rest of the show. Reverend Wilson, I need you to move to your left. Stop right there. Okay, very good. Well, let me start with you, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, because you and Ben Crump have been working together for years and years and years, and Lee Merritt, all of these lawyers who are involved in these cases. I have met them through you, and so many of these cases have cycled through you. You don't have enough bandwidth to take them all on. One of the things that really attracted me to what Miss Stanley was doing was because in real time, we were not getting any of that story. And there's so much more that she could tell us. I mean, and of course, to fully disclose, Jesse Smollett, as you know, did his community service that he was sanctioned to do at Rainbow Push. Of course, we want to talk with Reverend Dr. Wilson Esquire about that. But there were a lot of moving parts, and there were a lot of very influential people who were involved in this case. And then as the case got hotter, they wouldn't touch it. So of course, whenever people are in trouble, they get put in Reverend Jackson's lap, but it's okay. But there was a lot that she pulled out even in these 10 minutes today. Quite frankly, that's very, very disturbing.
Well, Santita, it is very disturbing. I'm not really surprised by the evidence that she's uncovered. And just to be clear, it is evidence. Evidence is when you have people who are willing to testify, or any documents, any background information that would tend to support one side or the other, one position or another. And a lot of that information, if it was known, was concealed and not presented to the trier of fact. So in other words, what does that mean? Just because something happens and there could be valuable evidence, a lot of times when you see cases of corruption, the law enforcement or people who present the evidence, sometimes the prosecutor, will intentionally prevent a jury from getting that evidence, from hearing that evidence that could be critical in a case. But there were other things that are distressing surrounding Jesse Smollett's conviction. There were things, Santita, and we talked about this on your show. I know we talked about it on my show and many shows that happened during the trial that were very, very disturbing. The judicial temperament was certainly not appropriate. Judicial conduct.
Please go to that.
Yes. The conduct of the judge, in my impression, and the judge's temperament during trial were completely, in my impression, inappropriate, not appropriate for any case, certainly not a case where someone's life and liberty were at stake. There were issues in terms of how the judge treated the parties in front of the jury, the judicial temperament, some of the issues that, some of the evidence that came in and some of the evidence that wasn't allowed in. There were a lot of things, Santita, that I thought were exceptional and extraordinary, and that prejudiced Jesse Smollett without a question. And when you have those things that happen, and the judge threatening, of course he said he didn't threaten, or people threatening lawyers representing Jussie Smollett, making it so that Jussie really couldn't get his fair day in court. Now, those are issues that are taken up on appeal. And here we have ultimately the Illinois Supreme Court ruling the right way, maybe for not all the reasons that I would expect, but certainly coming down with the right determination. And I think that we have to look at the evidence that was left out, the police misconduct, a lot of information that the judge deemed was too prejudicial and would not allow the jury to hear, that could have certainly impacted the outcome of the underlying trial. So I think, Santita, there is, from my standpoint, there's misinformation, there's misapplication of the law and the rules on all levels of Jussie Smollett's case from a legal standpoint. So I don't think it's just the police, all the investigative work, the great investigative work that was done. I think there was stuff at trial and also post-trial. So this case ultimately is going to be, I think, a poster child for judicial misconduct, police misconduct, and perhaps prosecutorial misconduct, meaning the special prosecutor that was brought in to try the case. Now, again, I'm sure we have very, very fine attorneys that were trying that case, but in this instance, there were a lot of things that were aberrations and violations that should not have happened.
You saw all of those red flags in real time. Why were they? Is there anything that you could do during trial to call attention to that? I mean, do you have any recourse during trial? I mean, because it got quite contentious in the courtroom. Before I go to Reverend Dr. Wilson, I mean, there was a physical confrontation with the judge and one of his defense attorneys. She was in tears, and the cameras were off. It's just so there's no, well, that's what they tell us, no video evidence that this happened. I mean, what was that about?
Well, I think this entire case was it was a fabrication by police, and it was supported by this particular judge for some reason. The whole fact pattern that we were presented with when Jussie was assigned to us, it just didn't even make sense. Why would a star do this, what they suggested he did to himself? The whole premise was illogical. And somehow the chief of police was, at that time, was involved in the cover-up, which didn't make a lot of sense to any of us. I think that as a former criminal defense attorney, we have always seen instances where the police lie and they make up a fact pattern that supports the lies that they have told to the state. I think that apparently there was this desire to do this particular cover-up that must have had something to do with behavior by some police officers, particularly involving the police chief. It is rare that you have had a superintendent of police weigh in on this kind of minor offense, really. That was what shocked me. How, CK, would the superintendent, Attorney Hoffman, come to this low-level case? This is not a murder. This is not a case that he would have normally been involved with and testifying about. And so that was kind of a red flag for me. The judge was hostile towards Smollett, which corroborates this idea of a hate crime, because you have judges, they're human like everyone else. They have their own opinions about transgender, openly gay, and all of that. So they carry those biases within them. And I don't think that.
So you think homophobia was part of?
Oh, absolutely, without question.
Okay.
And so I think all of that, because Jussie on Empire played the role of a gay man who was living with someone. So his whole persona somehow was involved with the fabrication of the fact pattern and ultimately bringing him to trial and somehow punishing him. And having spent time with him while he was doing community service, I saw a different person than they depicted him in the case. It was a very sensitive young man who he wouldn't hurt anyone. I mean, he's
Well,
not that.
to interrupt, one of the things that Shelley Stanley brought out in her reporting, Attorney Hoffler and Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, Esquire, was that, for example, he brought out a movie theater for the people of Flint to give them a Christmas, and spent a substantial amount of money to get them food and to let them have a Merry Christmas in the midst of that water crisis, right? And his godmother's Angela Davis. His family are known in the San Francisco, Oakland area and Berkeley for their activism. They are known in show business for only taking roles that uplift people. I mean, they're that kind of people, because they could take many paths, because they're all very good looking, very talented people, and their mother would not allow them to do that. And they're a very close family, because what people don't know is that during his trial, I think she's got 20 children. Because when they came to push Attorney Hoffler, they came here and they stayed with him.
The entire family, mothers, sisters, brothers. I mean,
they would go to work and they'd come back to Chicago. They go to work, they come back to, because that's their brother. So, which is, when you come after a family like that, in show business and in fame, they get you when they separate you from your family. Yeah, I know this up close and personal. But when you keep your family with you, it's really hard to break you. And so I just, like you said, as we got, not just you, because you're one of the executives at the organization, the people, the woman at the front desk, everybody was just very impressed with him. And he didn't behave that way because he was a young man in trouble. That's just his whole family were that way. And so we're just given your experience in the court system in Chicago, because you know all of the players here, Reverend Dr. Wilson. Were you surprised, for example, by, it is alleged, it was not alleged, it was reported that the judge became physically confrontational? Would you explain that? Because when I read it, I was like, you got to be CK, Attorney Hoffler. I said, now, wait a minute. This judge was acting as if he was going to come out the stand and physically beat this woman, this Black woman who was his lawyer. Would you explain what is reported to have happened?
Well, what happens oftentimes, and Attorney Hoffler knows this, judges become very emotional in many cases, and they will steer. If there's a jury, they steer the jury based on their behavior towards the defendant. And so when the judge begins to say that if you continue, then I will have you removed from court, and you make all of those allegations, you're signaling the trier of fact, which is the jury, you better watch this person. I'm not happy with this person. And I don't believe the defense. I think the defense is doing something inappropriate, and therefore, as a judge, I will take care of her. That's the kind of tone that was presented by this particular judge in the Smollett case. And so many times your defendants, they don't know how to respond, even though you tell them to remain silent and try not to show any emotion. It's difficult when your freedom is in jeopardy for you to sit silently and listen to lies about you. And so you could see Jussie becoming very frustrated as he sat there listening to people make up stuff. I believe, and Attorney Hoffler knows this, oftentimes there is a move to discredit even the state's attorney, which at that time was Kim Foxx. And so this whole idea that you bring in a former U.S. attorney and a partner in a major law firm to be
in a blue chip law firm that is one of the most esteemed blue chip law firms in America and the world,
to come, Attorney Hoffman, and try this case. It's not a murder case. It's not a major drug case. It's not a case that he would step down from his heights to become the special prosecutor. Doesn't need the money, doesn't need the prestige. I was just shocked when Dan Webb took the case. That just didn't fit,
When,
except that there's
when
a
the case,
bigger reason.
when it was brought to him, I mean, because remember, the Obama's office called on Jussie Smollett's behalf. They tried to subpoena uh, the person who called from Michelle Obama's office, and she wouldn't accept the subpoena. So you were just this has happened, and so you were trying to figure out what is going on here.
Well, we knew then it was political. It had nothing to do with Jussie Smollett. He was a political pawn to draw major attention to the state's attorney, Kim Foxx. It was the added level of pressure that they were placing on her. This is a state's attorney whose office had been marched on by the police department. The police normally are the people that produce evidence for the state. They go out and investigate crimes. It is rare that your state's attorney is now attacked by the police department. They really are supposed to protect her, not to abuse her and to lie on her and to paint her as this somehow steering this case. And so you had all of those political shenanigans, which had nothing to do with Jussie Smollett. He just happened to be a case defendant in the midst of all of these political machinations to discredit and get Kim Foxx to step down as state's attorney, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, that's in fact what we saw. Attorney Hoffler was this whole narrative built around. They made it about Kim Foxx.
They did,
and
that's why they didn't have the research that you're talking. The evidence that Attorney Hoffler mentions that you normally would be pulling out of in a criminal case. That evidence was suppressed. The accurate facts were suppressed so that they could continue to build this narrative that somehow Attorney Kim Foxx had tried to help this man and do something that was unusual for a state's attorney, which is not true. State's attorneys refuse to try cases all the time, particularly ones they can't prove. They do that. There's no point in wasting the kind of money and time to go to trial for this kind of misdemeanor at best. Someone who's injured themselves. He didn't injure anyone. So, I mean, none of the facts that they presented ultimately at trial made any sense.
Well, were you surprised by the Illinois State Supreme Court's decision, and upon what basis did they overturn this conviction?
Well, they said that this is standard rule of law. I wasn't surprised. I'm sure Attorney Hoffler wasn't surprised. You can't be repeatedly tried and convicted of the same thing over and over again.
Well, I mean, when you have a deal with the prosecutor, when there's a deal struck that there's not going to be prosecution of a case, that's what happens. The prosecutor is the one who has the ultimate authority to decide which cases you move forward with and which cases you don't move forward with. And when that decision is made, it's made. Think about the ramifications of overruling, going behind, and overturning the prosecutor for the states, or for whether it's a local prosecutor, a state prosecutor, or federal prosecutors, the person who makes that decision, and you don't agree and you circumvent. Imagine what type of mayhem we would have in the system. And this is not a major case, no matter how you slice it. If we assume that what was alleged by the special prosecutor is true, let's assume, and I don't believe it's true, but let's assume if we assume that was true, that Jussie Smollett did everything he was being accused of doing, which I don't believe is the case, but if we assume that's the case, at best, this is not a case that should have resulted in a trial. Community service, yes, perhaps. Repayment of paying fines, yes, perhaps, but not a trial and a conviction and the time that he got. That is way overkill, and certainly not bringing in one of the anyone, and doesn't have to be someone of Dan Webb's caliber. That just adds insult to injury and reeks of political motivation. But even if you assume everything that they were alleging was true, the outcome was not the outcome that you would expect for a matter such as that.
And
And
this
so,
is, go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, that's it.
I was just going to say, Attorney Hoffa, this happens every day in
Mhm.
criminal court. Every single day, Black defendants are faced with this kind of situation where they are forced to trial, which costs us, the county or the state, a tremendous amount of money because you have to pay, you got a judge, you got court reporters, you have to open the building, you have to have that courtroom ready, you got jurors that you're paying to sit and hear this kind of case. It's a waste of money for this kind of
And not to say anything because I'm in Atlanta, but in the city of Chicago, there really are heinous crimes
Mhm.
that are being committed that require the time and attention. And this was not one of them.
I'm
So the solidarity, the kind of protest that we saw and the defiance that we saw in Jesse Smollett's family and people in the community, and my impression was, of course, justified. And I say that as an individual. I'm not speaking now as chair of Rainbow Push. I'm speaking as an individual, a lawyer who's a practitioner. I don't do criminal defense work. I do a lot of civil work. I do just civil work principally. But you can, if it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and smells like a duck, it's a duck. And when I do legal commentary for Court TV and other outlets, one of the things that I look at is why is this case even here? What is the judicial temperament? How are the witnesses performing? And is there a miscarriage of justice in that courtroom? That's what I look at. That's what I want to comment on because I'm interested in justice, no matter who the defendant is. Everybody in this system, everybody deserves his or her day in court, and everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And when you have something that's a misdemeanor and something that really should not have escalated to that point, you have to look behind where's the miscarriage of justice. So the Illinois Supreme Court got it right in its final determination. The justification, yeah, that was one reason, but there were a lot of other reasons. But see, to me, a victory is a victory. I'm not going to go behind why they ruled the way they ruled because I think they were correct in their ruling, but there were many other things that could have been escalated up to them. But this was the cleanest, the clearest, and the most no-brainer reason for the case to be overturned. That was a no-brainer, and it was a no-brainer from the inception. The case never should have proceeded because it was a no-brainer.
And it is rare that you see a state's attorney who makes a decision about a case to then have it challenged and the case tried when she had already settled the case. It was just unusual in a case like this. And I suppose they used the visibility of Jussie Smollett to try to paint a negative picture of the then state's attorney, Kim Foxx. And she had been under a great deal of pressure.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know how
when you say this
survived.
helped her to lose her job?
Yeah. She decided, I think that was part of the reason she decided to step back. And you saw an attack on Black state's attorneys across the country. Maryland
Especially Black women.
Black women, yes, all over the country. And we had at that time was 6 Black state's attorneys, I think. You had Marilyn Mosby, you had Atlanta, in Baltimore, you had Atlanta.
Who was convicted of stealing her own money.
Yeah. Fannie Willis in Georgia.
Who was convicted of trying to protect the Constitution. Let's keep on going. I mean, I'm just saying this is like,
so
well, Fannie Willis convicted in the court of public opinion for and another thing that never should have escalated to that point. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on.
No, go ahead.
No. I think it's important to connect the dots because people need to see the pattern here. Because Kim Foxx's reputation professionally has taken a tremendous hit.
Oh, yeah.
Bonnie Willis has taken a tremendous hit. Marilyn Mosby, tremendous hit. We keep on going. Once they leave public life, trying to get a job in the private sector is tough for them. People are looking at them sideways. And in Kim Foxx's case, this was horrific. And when you find, given our history, in Chicago with the police, with Fred Hampton, with Holman Square, which was a CIA black site where people were disappeared.
Still
Given,
did.
I mean, we was John Burge, Commander John Burge, who was raping black boys and men with cattle prods. This is a city that this happened in, and it took a generation to bring John Burge to justice, and only because Congressman Jonathan Jackson, who was not a congressman at the time, was, what did you say he was playing? I'm gonna play this one string guitar every Saturday until we get him out of his comfortable retirement with his boat in Florida and his Chicago pension, because the ruination of these black boys and men, it's on his hands, because he did this from his post as,
position.
I mean, my goodness. And so when I was reading what Shelley Stanley presented, I said, and this was in real time, C.K. Hoffler, and no one was talking about this, Reverend Wilson.
That's right.
I mean, and so I'm watching Kim Foxx be savaged every day. I'm watching Jussie Smollett be savaged, and arguably Empire. It was taken off television.
Yes.
And he was taking the hit for that. A whole lot of people were employed, and I'm like, wait a minute. But Taraji Henson, to be fair, and Terrence Howard and his co-stars said, wait a minute, this guy that you all were talking about, this is not the guy we know, and something is not right here. To their credit. But I mean, help me to understand what we're looking at here, because people are still shocked that the Illinois State Supreme Court basically vindicated him, Kim Foxx, and I think they put the Chicago police on blast, at least, Well,
and I think that is why, most people, when we have these elections, the judicial ballot is at the very end. We tend to ignore it. And you don't realize how important judges are.
Right.
You got the circuit judges that made that first decision, Attorney Hoffler and Santita. And then you have a right as a defendant to appeal a conviction. And when you appeal it, you go to another court, to the appellate court. And then if that court does not give you the satisfaction or the justice that you deserve, you can appeal it to the Illinois Supreme Court in certain kinds of cases. This case goes all the way up to the top court in the state of Illinois. All of them are elected by us. And so it's why it's important to know who sits on the Supreme Court, who sits on the appellate court, who sits on the circuit court. We know that the judges on that circuit court case, the lower level case where the trial happened, should never have been allowed to stay on the bench. And so when retention comes up, we say, well, I don't know the name and I don't know them, so I'm not going to vote. I'm tired. That's how these people keep passing justice over us. It doesn't matter whether you're Smollett or someone that's totally unknown. Your fate is in the hands of somebody that we should have not allowed to remain on the bench. That judge had some problems, perhaps. And don't think because they put that black robe on that the hate within them is gone. It's just a cover-up of who's behind the robe. And we have to know who sits in these courtrooms. It's very important.
I have no previous knowledge of this judge. I know nothing about this judge, didn't know who he was or anything. But I will say, for this case, his judicial temperament was not appropriate. For this
Why do you say that?
Because when you're a judge, you have to really be, your judicial temperament has to be even-handed, and you have to at least give the appearance of being impartial. I've been in cases, I've tried cases, I've had the misfortune of trying cases where judges were yelling, screaming at defendants. I remember I was trying a case in Gainesville with Willie Gary many, many years ago, over 20 years ago, where the judge was someone who was known to have bias. And he had a history of throwing books at lawyers when he didn't agree with their position. Now, fortunately, he didn't throw books at them.
In the courtroom?
Yeah. In the courtroom. Now, fortunately, he didn't do that because I dare say it would have been on, but I digress. Did I say that?
Yes, you said
but that. At that case,
wait a minute.
97 days.
I know her. Don't let the bushy fool you.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to, I mean,
It
throw a
would
book.
have.
You're going to throw a book at me? No. So anyway, the judge that we didn't experience that,
And I'm
but
not
we
fooled by
did.
your collar either, Reverend Dr. Wilson. So,
No,
Well, I
yeah.
mean, advocacy and fight is advocacy and fight.
they
Um,
will
but
arrest
but
lawyers. They
but
arrest us if
but
they
I have tried cases and prevailed where judges were openly hostile. Why? Because of the jury. Because the jurors in that case were very upset at the judge because the judge was trying to prevent. We got a blockbuster verdict, and the judge didn't even want that blockbuster verdict published, and the judge cross-examined and was yelling at the jurors for giving that kind of verdict. But fortunately, the press was in the courtroom, so it was recorded in it, and we were vindicated. But my point is that there are many judges who are absolutely phenomenal, and I am a big fan of judges, and a big proponent of judges. I'm a greater proponent of voting down ballot and make sure that you investigate who you are putting on the bench, because judicial temperament, how they handle defendants, are they even-handed? Are they leveling the playing field? Are they allowing this defendant, who in our system of justice is innocent until proven guilty, whether he or she believes he is innocent or not? Are they allowing this defendant to have his or her day in court? Are they being fair in their rulings? Are they being even-handed in their rulings? Are they showing favoritism or bias towards one side or the other? Favoritism and bias for a judge is not appropriate ever. Because in a criminal case, or even in a civil case, but in a criminal case, a person's life, liberty, and freedom are at issue, are at stake. And believe it or not, jurors really believe and really listen to judges, and they watch the judge. And there are a lot of times when you're trying a case where the jurors are exposed to a judge where you, as a trial lawyer, are not there. For instance, and the bailiff as well. For instance, when the jury is out, is taken in the back, the bailiff takes the jury in the back, and the bailiff spends a lot of time with those jurors. Sometimes bailiffs, to me, my experience has been they are phenomenal. But sometimes you might be in some places where bailiff can reflect the temperament of the judge. The bailiff hears what those jurors are saying and what they're thinking a lot. They may not be there for the deliberations, but when there's a witness that testifies, when someone responds a certain way, when the judge responds a certain way, when the jurors are walking back, they're talking about it. Oh my God, you see, the judge was mad. Yes, this and that. And the judge can send signals to the jury because the jurors look up to the judge. In fact, everybody in the courtroom typically looks up to the judge. So when the judge has a temperament that is detrimental to the defendant, the jurors are going to sometimes impute that temperament, and they're human. I mean, most jurors, when we are educating jurors in voir dire, that's voir dire is when we select the jurors. We are educating them on the facts of the case. We are told by our jury consultants and just our training that you have to understand that some jurors may not have a high school education. That doesn't mean they can't understand the issues. That doesn't mean they're not brilliant. That doesn't mean they don't reach the right decision. But you have to learn how to speak to jurors, and you can't use if you have this Harvard, Yale, Princeton, inspired, rhetoric and dialect when you're speaking to jurors who are comprised of the people of that jurisdiction, a jury of his peers. So they are looking at that judge. Many of them have never served a jury, have done jury service. They're going to believe the judge. They're going to say, well, if the judge thinks, I mean, looking at the judge obviously knows what we don't know. There's a lot of stuff we didn't hear, but the judge knows, the judge feels he's guilty. Well, maybe, and when they're deliberating, that extra, everybody's human. So that extra area of gray is going to be maybe in favor of what the judge is expressing, the judge's temperament, the judge's views. And if you poll jurors, they speak a lot about the judge They said, well, I remember the judge said this, the judge told us we need to do this because the judge rules the courtroom. It is his or her courtroom. So when the temperament, Santita, is off, is bad, is biased, is oppressive, is hysterical, then that permeates throughout the entire case and undoubtedly has an impact on the jurors.
Well,
So it's very important.
I have a couple minutes here, and I want you all to close us out.
Mm.
And let me just, because we're going to continue to follow this, because this sent shockwaves through Chicago and quite frankly through the country to hear that this case had been overturned, because the corporate media have conveyed or conferred upon Jussie Smollett the presumption of guilt. There's just something that he did not do. Um, and that's not fair. I mean, and when I think Reverend Dr. Wilson, because he did do his community service at Rainbow Push, he was guided to us, he was brought to us. And we said, sure, and of course, you as a lawyer, you were looking at the case, and given all that we have seen down through the years, you said, well, no, Reverend said, no, we will have him here, and he is not going to be an outcast in Chicago. And we're going to work with him. We're going to work with it. So, I mean, what is our takeaway from this? Well, first you, Attorney Hoffler, and then you, Reverend Dr. Wilson.
Our takeaway is vote. We just went through a very contentious election. Mm-hmm. And even though the results may not have been what people wanted, and they may have been what people wanted, but certainly there's a large group of people who were not happy, including me, by the results of the elections across the board. I think it's important to vote and to vote down ballot. Don't stop at the top, because as we see, there's a move to empower the states more. And when you empower the states more, you put more power in the states, the elected officials become increasingly important. And in this case, judges, but not just judges, everyone who's elected. So vote down ballot, number one. Do your research. If you don't know about the candidates, there are plenty of organizations that have research on all of the candidates, like a Rainbow Push. Actually, your congressional, a lot of people, a lot of nonprofit organizations have independent research on candidates, on issues that are on the ballot. Thirdly, let's not be quick to condemn someone who has been an iconic figure in our community for a very long time. And I think that Jussie Smollett was judged wrongly from the beginning, before the trial. And I felt that was doing him a disservice. It was a disservice to the judicial system. And I think that we have to be very careful, because what we have to really think about is, what if that were your son, your sister, your brother, your uncle, your mother, your father? Because don't blink, because it very well could be. And we've got to do better in our communities. It doesn't matter what major media says. Major media does. Major media leaves out or fails to include. We know that 1 + 1 = 2. And when 1 + 1 = 5 and doesn't make any sense, or as my grandma said, don't make no kind of sense, we need to call it. This doesn't make sense. And we don't need to condemn people, because think of where we are headed politically in this country. It could be you, your mother, your brother, your sister, your uncle, your aunt, your child. And we do not have the ability and the liberty to just prejudge people, understanding that in this country, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Well, not just where we're headed, where we've been.
Where we've been.
We have been killed literally extrajudiciously.
Yeah.
And we have people who are on death row, and black, white, brown, yellow, and red. There's evidence that could exonerate them. Maybe, may or may not be true, but we're still killing these folks. This is not right. And we're killing people's reputations that they have to live with. In the meantime, the corporate media they're not doing due diligence. They sat in that courtroom too, Reverend Dr. Wilson, and they had access to this same information that Shelley Stanley reported to us, and they didn't touch it. They didn't touch it. 1 minute for you, Reverend Dr. Wilson.
Well, I think it's clear that we have to be vigilant, and Laquan McDonald's case would never have come to light without pressure. The same thing with Jussie Smollett, his defiance, saying, I am not guilty. You have to push to the end. And it's important that our organization is going to be spending a lot more time with Attorney Hoffler's direction, helping people monitor these elections, monitor these people we put in office. Criminal justice and education are perhaps the most important elements that we're going to have to look to the states to correct during these next 4 years until we can regain our power in 2 years of the House and the Senate. We can't give up and we can't give out. We have to make sure that we elect judges, that we monitor these courtrooms, that we support our justice system in a way that educates people. And so that when you are called to jury duty, don't try to avoid it. You need to think, you could have been on the Smollett case. You could have been on the Laquan McDonald case. It's important that we are present when these systems are trying to eliminate our voices and our strength. We have the power, and I'm certainly faithful that organizations like Rainbow Push and others, we're going to educate, we're going to engage, and we're going to take action. Our action is court monitoring more than ever before, doing civics education. We've got to know how these different pieces work together to provide justice for us and for our people. So I thank you, Santita.
Well, I thank you, Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, Rainbow Push, Chair of Rainbow Push, Attorney C.K. Hoffler. Of course, she's on WAOK every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, and on Court TV throughout the week. Past National President of the National Bar Association, of course, Reverend Dr. Wilson, pastor, and head of the Push Excel program and lawyer. And so we just thank you. And Shelley Stanley, we thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for bringing all of these facts to light. Coming up, everybody, let's talk about Project 2025. What is it? And did you know that it was really enacted in 2022? Don't just say under Trump. No. This is a bipartisan betrayal. And we need to be clear on what this is. Stay right here on the Santita Jackson Show. As we're getting ready to gobble, gobble. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a moment.